And welcome to another edition of Ask Ira Live. I'm Ira Winderman from SunSentinel.com. Emma Kate Austin has the day off today, so we have a special guest who apparently only works during the playoffs. Dave Hyde, Sun Sentinel columnist, joins us here. And Dave, this is the real season we've been waiting for. This is the moment of truth for the Miami Heat, the NBA playoffs. Circuitous road, interesting road. Last night, you and I up till the middle of the night because every game goes overtime. Where do you find the Miami Heat right now? Where do you think the Heat stand going into these NBA playoffs?
Well, it has been a circuitous road, if we can say that. I have trouble getting
that
out, but it's ended up right where everybody thought at the start of the year. Sixth place in the East, that's right where most of us thought.
Sure.
44 wins, no surprise there. And, you know, you have average talent in, and you pretty much have an average product for the Heat. So the question is, can the sum of their parts once again be better in a playoff series than... You know, it was a predictable NBA season.
Well, that's what I want to ask you, Dave. You know, we'll look at the work that Eric Spoelstra did, and you can make an argument that he got the most out of this roster. Has this Miami Heat team already been maximized by what Eric Spoelstra has done? Is there another playoff level? And do you think that the Heat really got everything they thought they were going to get with those offseason free agency contracts? James Johnson, Kelly Olynyk, we know about the injury to Dion Waiters, all $50 million plus. Did the Heat get everything, like you said, out of this roster, or were there times when you wondered losses to the Magic, losses to the Nets, losses to the Knicks, losses to the Sacramento Kings? Should there have been more this season?
No, you look at when they were up, you could almost go by the schedule. When they have good stretches, the schedule helped, and when they had bad stretches, the schedule hurt them. So, but this is an interesting series to me in that it's going to be Eric Spoelstra who has to be the star because
Really?
they got to match up against Ben Simmons. They have a few guys they could try on him, how to defend him, how do they attack a young Philadelphia team.
Mostly, yeah.
And they'll have a chance to ambush them in game one, you would think. And if the Heat are going to win this series, I think they got to win certainly one of the first two, and I think game one's the easiest one.
I mean, the thing to me is when I look at this season, I see this. There were so many close games that got away. There weren't that many necessarily upset victories. So when you look at it and you say, okay, they went from 41-41 and out of the playoffs by a tiebreaker, up to sixth place, up to 44. This could have been a 50-victory season. To me, that's the thing I wonder about this team. When you look at the overtime games, lately all they've been playing is overtime. I'm at the point now I think an NBA game is 53 minutes instead of 48 minutes. I almost feel like they were on the cusp of something special, and then you have the recent losses. The loss to New York last Friday, the overtime loss to the Thunder, and it tempers where you are right now. But we know this. Unlike last year, last day of the season, Heat win, Bulls win, Heat lose on a tiebreaker. The Heat are in the NBA playoffs. So, Dave, for the first time in 2 years, when we're done with this show, I'm going to do my player-by-player matchups. They'll be at sunsentinel.com first thing on Friday. But let's look a little bit at this Miami Heat first-round series against the Philadelphia 76ers and where it stands. And I guess, well, since you're almost our Hassan Whiteside columnist, you've written so many columns about him, I'm really interested in your take. Start of this series, it looks like Joel Embiid will miss at least the first game with his facial fracture. I personally believe he will not play until the Sixers lose. I think they would love to keep him out for the first round. I think they have greater visions. Dave, you have written so much about Hassan Whiteside this season. As we go through some pictures and photos of Hassan right here, can you sort of take us through what kind of seasons has this been for Hassan? Has he done what you thought? Has he achieved what you thought? And sort of maybe take us through some of your pieces you wrote about him.
Well, it's not really what I thought. It's the Heat. You can see there is a disconnect between the Heat and what they want from Whiteside and what he's delivering. There's almost, look, he's got a great sense of humor, a goofy personality, and the Heat aren't a goofy franchise. And so, to me, this playoff series against Embiid, if they go against each other,
right.
And they have a history of Twitter fights, of
Sure.
actually on court almost a fight.
Yes, last game.
And so this is a final referendum to me on Whiteside, okay? Because the Heat need him this series. Between Embiid and Simmons, the Sixers have the top talent in the series.
Yes,
okay?
I would agree with that.
And so the question is, can Whiteside neutralize Embiid? And we don't know how Embiid's going to come back,
Right.
even if he does. You know, he's going to be wearing a mask.
Young player, first major injury, and that's not involving his foot and his other joints.
This should be a series Whiteside can neutralize him. And if he can, then that's a good a good step forward for the Heat.
And I think, Dave, when you look at the start of the series, you always want to steal one of the first two games on the road. This format, 2-2, 1-1-1, first two in Philadelphia, starting at 8 o'clock on Saturday. Sixers most likely will roll out Amir Johnson. If Hassan Whiteside cannot win his matchup against Amir Johnson, then I think you look at the series and realize you're in trouble. I believe the 76ers will not play Joel Embiid until they have a loss in the series, that they'll try to string it along, get through. This is a referendum on so many levels for Hassan Whiteside, and maybe also for the Heat, Dave, in this level. If Hassan can establish trade value, then at worst, even if you lose in the first round, a team lacking a big man like Milwaukee might say, hey, he wasn't that bad against the Sixers. Maybe he can be a guy for our team. So I think it's sort of twofold. Then we turn to forward. And again, these matchups right now, it looks like it's going to shape up as James Johnson against Dario Saric, the outside shooting big man, and then just really good versatile forwards in Josh Richardson, great defensive year. Robert Covington, similar. Good defender, good three-point shooter, offers a threat. Dave, to me, when I look at this matchup, I say to myself, James Johnson is the X factor. I think he's the X factor in this series. You remember what he did last season, 30-11 finish, how he finished the season. When you look at these forward matchups, and especially at James Johnson, what did the Heat have to achieve here?
Well, the question is how are they going to use James Johnson? I mean, again, I'm curious. Spoelstra has a lot of decisions to make.
Yes.
And because, look, the Heat are playing, 10 guys at times, a lot of nights?
Maybe even 11 if
maybe
Magruder,
11.
yeah.
In the playoffs, you're not going to be able to do that as easily, okay? The minutes are going to be cut some, and a lot of that will be dependent upon what Spoelstra wants, who's hot, and what matchups does he want to get. And James Johnson, does he want James Johnson to go outside and cover Simmons some?
Right.
I'm interested, and can James Johnson do that for an extended period in the series? And if so, his length could cause problems. And Simmons to me right now is the best player in the series. And the question number one is, how are the Heat going to go about defending him?
No, and I agree. When I look at James Johnson, I look back to last season, I look at a guy that they gave a 4-year, $60 million contract at 31 years old. Eric Spoelstra, Dave, always uses that term Swiss Army knife. James Johnson has to be the Swiss Army knife in this series. I could see at various points in this series, maybe not J.J. Redick, but guarding every other 76ers starter. He could match up with Embiid. He certainly can match up with Saric at the start of the games. With Simmons' length, like you mentioned, Dave, he could wind up at point guard and certainly against Covington also. So to me, James Johnson, he's almost the swing factor. We'll get to our prediction on the series later, but I think he could be the key as sort of the universal element of this series.
And the other thing is, with Embiid out, does Spoelstra want to go small and really cause matchup problems for Philadelphia or issues for Philadelphia that they're not really accustomed to? So I'm especially in Game 1, as I said, I think the Heat have a great chance. Philadelphia, young teams, won 16 in a row. Everybody's saying how great they are for a reason. But are they getting ahead of themselves?
I totally agree. When we get to our predictions, the old steal one of the first two. And let's face it, this Heat team is fragile enough. If they don't get one of the first two and they come back home after an extended break in this series, will it be rough? Then we get to guard. And to me, guard is fascinating for this reason. The starting point guards are Goran Dragic and Ben Simmons. There is no chance that Goran Dragic is going to guard Ben Simmons. But Goran Dragic has to almost be great in this series. I mean, again, you spoke to me about the top two players in the series. You believe they're Simmons and Embiid in some order, and I agree. So at best, the Heat have the third best player in this series. When you look at Goran Dragic and what he's done this season, I wrote in my SunSentinel.com column, I believe he was the Heat's MVP. I don't think there was much of a race this year. You look at the backcourt in the series. Tyler Johnson and Goran Dragic starting. Philadelphia coming in with Redick and Ben Simmons. What's going to happen in the backcourt?
Well, I think Dragic needs to assert himself more on this team. Coming into the year, he came out of the European Championship, and you thought, okay, this is his team now. And as the season went on, he deferred and he deferred and he deferred. This is a series, they really... That Markelle Fultz, I mean, where do you see
triple-double final game of the season for the Sixers?
But this should be a chance for Dragic to really assert himself that
as an all-star,
as an all-star, and as the not de facto leader, but the actual leader right now. This is a good matchup for him, I think.
And again, when you look at the Philadelphia side of the equation, beyond Goran, the Heat is going to start Tyler Johnson. It looks like that's the lineup they've gone with. He has to be better. He has been okay at times. The Heat have tried to make him a starter. I think if you ask NBA executives and scouts, is Tyler Johnson a starting shooting guard on a playoff team? Is he a starting shooting guard on a championship contender? I think they would tell you right now that's not the case. And I think that's going to leave the Heat at somewhat of a deficit because we know J.J. Redick, for the lack of experience that the 76ers have, he's the guy with the playoff experience. Hasn't been great with the Clippers in the time he was there, but at least he's been there. And Dave, that brings me with Tyler Johnson back to the intangibles in this series and Dwyane Wade. Look, you remember the game against Philadelphia at American Airlines Arena. Dwyane Wade, when he single-handedly beat the 76ers at the end of the game, he was unbelievable. This is my house, the whole deal. Last few games, not so good. And Dave, what's fascinating is, in the game that ended the season, when they needed someone to step forward in that final game against the Raptors, Dwyane Wade didn't play at the end. Dave, has the Dwyane Wade story sort of turned a little bit the other way? And should Erik Spoelstra be wed to Dwyane Wade as his closer, as his key playoff guy, or have we moved a little away from that?
I don't think Erik can be wed to anybody on this roster because he's got options, and there's nobody great. Now, Wade did hit the shot to tie it up that almost sent that
right.
should have won
Yes.
it in regulation. So he has moments, and that's really what he can deliver. You're hoping he has one great moment in this series that could win a game. Does he have that in him? I don't know, but anybody expecting him to carry the team like he is living in
right.
the past. Can he have a moment at age 36 that either makes a big shot or a big play that helps win a game?
But that's my whole point. I think there are Heat fans out there right now who think that Dwyane Wade will be the closer every game, that Dwyane Wade will make the difference in 2, 3, 4 games. Dave, I think we're at the point right now, if Dwyane Wade does it for one game and wins one game, that the other guys are going to have to carry the load. And I'm just wondering, what we've seen from Dwyane Wade in the most recent sample size has to make you wonder, so if anyone can Dwyane Wade flip the playoff switch?
Sure, and you'll see veterans do that in the playoffs. And he hasn't been great, but anybody who expected him to come in and be the Dwyane Wade of 2006 or 2009 really hasn't been paying attention. And so if he can have one moment, a playoff moment, to help the team, not carry the team,
right.
then that's really what the expectations are for Wade.
It's going to be fascinating. And a matter of fact, now, as we turn to our mailbag, we always like to answer your questions here at Ask Ira Live, and every single day, 365 a year at sunsentinel.com. Bunch online today, one about Hassan Whiteside and his impact. Dave Hyde will have a column about Hassan Whiteside in tomorrow's Sun Sentinel, and also right now at sunsentinel.com. So, Dave, let's sort of take a sampling of the mailbag going into the playoffs and what the readers are asking and what they want to know.
I just like that I get to read Ask Ira. I read it on the online. Now I get to read
well,
it
what
to
people don't know
Ira.
And Dave also writes them in a lot, but I tell him it's like those contests on the radio. You're not eligible for Ask Ira Live.
Writer,
yes,
that's the problem.
We'll leave it
Okay,
at that.
let's go. Question 1. Ira, we've seen a 20-game sample now, and a few things have crystallized. Dwyane Wade can help this team unless he hurts this team. We need our best 5 at crunch time, and both coach and player need to understand and be okay that Wade may not fit that role any longer in certain situations. What do you say?
Well, that's from Brian in Fort Lauderdale. And Dave, that goes back to the discussion we just had. And I almost want to take that to a step further. You know the way we do things these days in the internet age, and wanting to be first, the question's going to be, is Dwyane Wade coming back next season? Let me ask you this, Dave. You've already used a roster spot this season on Udonis Haslem because everyone loves Udonis. Is Dwyane Wade at the point right now where the Heat have to say to themselves, maybe it's time for us to move in a different direction? The reunion has been wonderful. I think you'd feel the warmth. You've been there at the start of games, the way fans are. Should Dwyane Wade come back next season? Do you think Dwyane Wade will come back next season? This is sort of my Ask Dave segment.
Ask Dave. Well, let's get through the playoffs first to see what he does. But if I was guessing, there's going to be a logjam at that position, especially with Dion Waiters. How much can you invest in that position? In other words, what would the contract look like if he comes back?
It would be a minimum.
And second of all, his playing time. So we're going to put that's going to be an uncomfortable situation. Right now, I'd say I don't think he'll want to come back, and I don't think that the Heat would want him back either.
And I've heard that. I've heard that from people in the organization right now who are wondering if he wants to go through this drudgery, quote unquote, that you could see it sort of wearing down. And Dave, I don't know if there are going to be better moments than what he experienced his first game back, the game against Philadelphia, getting into playoffs, sipping champagne after the game Wednesday with Udonis Haslem.
And saying he's tipsy.
Yes, it shows it where we are, yeah.
15 years together with Haslam. God bless him, right?
It took me a full beer there. So I think the Dwyane Wade story, I guess guess the one lesson we've learned is the Dwyane Wade story never goes away when it comes to the Heat.
And if we learn anything through the years, it's not to second-guess Dwyane Wade too much.
Right.
Because he's proven that. Okay, let's go to second. Ask Ira. Wildly inconsistent play, lack of killer instinct, playing down to lesser opponents, and plenty of nights where the stars don't show. Nope, Eric Spoelstra ain't got enough magic in his wand to make this playoff swing anything but a one and quickly done. Pat of Deerfield Beach.
I don't want to be the guy. First of all, we'll give our predictions a little later in the show, but I don't want to be Mr. Negative, and I know every time I've picked against the Heat in a playoff situation, Thunder series, first time they won the championship, you hear for it for years. But Dave, when you look at this team, when you looked at this team last night, a wonderful effort against the Raptors, when you see them on their best nights, some of the effort against the Warriors, against the Rockets this season, at any point have you said to yourself, this is a championship contender? At any point have you said to yourself, this is a conference finals contender?
Even beyond that, when do they usually have the best player or two on the court? No matter who they're playing.
Like we talked about in this series.
They have a lot of average talent, and to me, the one star they have is Spoelstra. And he'll be asked to be a star in this series.
And the thing is also, when you look at this series and you look at this matchup against Philadelphia, again, I don't think it's even the top two players. I think it's the depth of talent. I think it's what Philadelphia added. We just spoke about Dwyane Wade. At the NBA trading and buyout deadline, the Heat were in the market. The Heat added Dwyane Wade, and there was a celebration at the arena. The Sixers very subtly added Marco Bellinelli and added Ersan Ilyasova. I think they've grown as a roster a little more. I think the Heat has stagnated. We had the Dion Waiters injury. We'll get to that in a second, obviously being out for the season. But I think when I look at the Heat and I say, who has grown this season? Josh Richardson has grown this season. Justice Winslow, to a degree, has grown this season. Hassan Whiteside has not. James Johnson has not. Tyler Johnson has not. And Dave, that's why when people go to me, what's their chances? I almost feel like there's a subtle degree of regression here.
Yeah, and that's if you're moving forward, you were hoping one of these guys would emerge as a star. It looked like Josh Richardson had a chance to go a little more at the start of the season than he did maybe in the last half of the year. But again, there's a simple question in the NBA: who's your go-to guy? Who is the go-to guy with the Heat? They don't have one. They have five.
And that's why it was James Johnson at the end of the game against the Raptors at the end of regulation, because he's tried James Johnson, he's tried Josh Richardson, he's tried Dwyane Wade, he's tried Goran Dragic. You're right. In the Heat's last 10 clutch situations, they've probably had 5 or 6 guys. You know at the end of the game in Cleveland, LeBron's the guy. You know at the end of the game, somehow Ben Simmons will be facilitating something. Maybe J.J. Redick taking the shot. It'll be John Wall. It'll be Brad Beal. It'll be DeMar Rosen. It'll be last night we saw Kyle Lowry. That's the one guy when you and I are sitting courtside there in Philadelphia, and it is a tie game or down one. I'm going to turn to you, and I'm going to go, who's going to take the shot? And you're going to tell me?
I'm going to pretend I didn't hear you, just like I have all year, Ira, because I have no idea going into this point who's going to get the last
Who's the
shot.
guy? So, absolutely.
Okay, next question, Ira. Just how much better would this team have been with Dion Waiters? Even with his up-and-down nature, 3 or 4 more wins is not out of the question. Dion lives for big-time spotlight moments. Skip from Tampa.
Yeah, Dave, I think that's a really good question, and I think the reason is this, is Dion Waiters is coming back. He had his season-ending ankle surgery in January. He's sort of been out of sight, out of mind. We saw him in the locker room a bunch of times when Syracuse made the NCAA tournament. He let us know about that. When the Eagles won the Super Bowl, he let us know about that. But this is really a two-pronged thing for the Heat, like we spoke about with Dwyane Wade. We know as good as Dwyane is, they have to fit Dion in because no one is trading for a player with 3 years left on a 4-year, $42 million contract, and he was one of the guys who was supposed to be the next phase of the Heat. Dave, when you look at this team, is there any way you could superimpose Dion Waiters into this mix, or has it become sort of, because Dwyane came here, you don't even see the Dion role? I assume he's going to go back to a starting role, but how much better does Dion make this team?
Well, he's the one guy at last year who would take the fearless shot.
Yes.
Okay, and that's really what this team lacks. So they desperately need him. In the 46 games, he was healthy last year. And then the question is, can he stay healthy, really, to me, moving forward? But they need his game. They need his heart, for lack of a better term. And, you know, how that all shakes out at that guard position, I'm going to be fascinated by in this offseason.
Well, and Dave, to me, it's almost like the work you're doing also with the Dolphins and some of the stuff with the Ryan Tannehill thing. The fact that he's been out and the fact you don't know what you're getting and people are talking now, should the Dolphins draft a quarterback? How much should you go in the offseason for the Heat and say, we have our starting shooting guard. We don't have to worry about that. We have to worry about everything else. We have our go-to guy. In other words, just like the Dolphins with Tannehill, it seems like Adam Gase is all in. He is our starting quarterback. But there's this little, if we can draft a quarterback, if we can build for the future. So let me ask you this. You're Pat Riley. You committed 4 years, $42 million to Dion Waiters. But how much are you really all in with him?
Well, you're not all in with anybody on this roster, I don't think. Okay, you're going to look at where can we improve, and that comes down to options, right? Who's going to be available this offseason? So, if they can improve at shooting guard, they'll do that in a second.
Yeah, I think that'll be interesting. I think the Dion Waiters situation will be something in the offseason we'll hear more. And honestly, I hope he's just ready for the start of the playoffs, start of the regular season and training camp, because there's even some question about that. Okay, Dave, well, welcome you in here because this has been a regular feature now for all of our weeks here, our 13th show on Ask Ira Live. We've looked back all season on the Heat's 30th anniversary season. The special moments, the special players, sort of reflecting back because it's hard to believe it's been 3 decades already. And I really thought an interesting list this week going into the playoffs will be all the celebrities at American Airlines Arena. I mean, that's the one thing. You see the empty seats on plenty of drudgery days and Tuesdays and Wednesdays during the regular season, but somehow in the playoffs, everyone wants to be seen. So I put together earlier this year, it's already available on sunsentinel.com, a list of the all-time 10 top celebrities who have been at Miami Heat games, and I thought we'd have some fun today and roll through that list. So let's start with our numbers 10 through 8, if we could, right here. Number 10 on my list, Romero Britto, the local artist who's had a lot of his artwork on display at American Airlines Arena.
I don't remember.
No, but if you go around the arena, all his stuff is there, especially in the concourse in the Heat office. This is actually someone, if we're doing the movers with an arrow up or down, I mean, DJ Khaled is there all the time. Hassan Whiteside's best Snapchat buddy, Khaled was there with his son the other day. He's become a real Heat presence. And then, Dave, we talk about reunion time. And it's really interesting because she was gone.
Was that a reunion as in union? Is that?
I didn't even realize I was doing that. And that's Gabrielle Union, of course. Or we call her Mrs. Dwyane Wade, but as she said already on Snapchat and Twitter, I'm a lot more than Mrs. Dwyane Wade, so we'll leave it at that. But Dave, how much fun has it been to have Gabrielle Union back in the building, Dwyane Wade's wife there, and sort of some, at least, of the star power we saw during the Big Three era?
Well, evidently, I would love to do a column on this, sitting behind her, because she is a live fan, evidently. You talk to people, she voices her basketball knowledge at
with
the
referees.
So that'd be fun. Look, it's always fun to have celebrities, and the fact that Wade and Gabrielle Union are a couple makes it a lot more fun.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one thing. This is not a player's wife who was going to a basketball game and just sort of sitting there idly by and getting on with her life. This is an absolute passionate sports fan going back to her time, as we see here at Nebraska, and her ties to the Cornhuskers. She's taken Dwyane out there for football games. So I think it's going to be really fun having her back in the building, having her back on the Heat side. And for those who are watching this live tonight, Dwyane and Gabrielle on HGTV will be doing a house flip special. So there's that pre-playoff element also.
You're working in promos.
Be worldly as I can. Let's continue down the list with another 3. Starting at number 7, Floyd Money Mayweather. He, again, was at the games again this week. Remember, you were at that game when he made that fight with Manny Pacquiao.
He walked down and he walked over to Pacquiao and they started talking.
That was crazy.
And that was a crazy night.
And I turned to her and I said, Dave, you've got to write this.
You did say that.
And I think you might have gotten more Twitter hits that one night on the fight coming together.
Embarrassing. I'm there for a basketball game and a boxing match breaks out.
And, of course, Flo Rida, he wrote a Heat anthem very close to Udonis Haslem. Udonis Haslem has been in a Flo Rida video, so those two are close. You're going to see him plenty. And here, Dave, is a really interesting name, because this goes back to your football background and everything, to the jersey that sort of still hangs at American Airlines Arena.
Back in the corner,
now in the
right?
corner with no lights on it. But Dan Marino, I think, Dave, especially in previous years, really embraced that another team was in town. We saw them with his children a lot, courtside seats. It seems like he really showed that he is the fabric of South Florida by showing up at so many key Heat games.
Well, he told me his kids loved to go to the games, and he loved to, like any dad, loved to go with his kids. So they would go, and they had, end of the court line seats right there.
And it's interesting, Dave, as we sort of look back at Dan Marino and some of his work here in South Florida and everything, I've got to ask you this question. You've done so much work with Dan. You know how much of a part of the community he is now, his unbelievable efforts with children's charities, children's hospitals, things like that. So I'm going to ask you the question that everyone asks in South Florida. You're the voice of South Florida. Greatest all-time South Florida athlete, the man we see in the picture right now, or the man, and I don't mean this meanly in a way to Dan, who's brought 3 championships to South Florida? Dwyane Wade or Dan Marino?
To me, that's a generational question. If you come in the 80s and the early 90s, Dan's your man, okay? If you're a 2000 on,
right, more
Wade's
millennial
your guy. Yeah, so it's sort of like who's bigger, Shula or Riley? Again, it depends on where you're coming from, what era you're living in.
And maybe a couple of years, who's bigger, Shula, Riley, or Spoelstra? But we'll see. That's another story for another day.
Wow, you're taking it there, Ira. Good.
Take the list almost down to the end here. Serena Williams obviously lives in Casa Serena, just down the road from the arena. She's been there a lot. Has done commercial work with Dwyane Wade, big Heat fan. The Heat have a lot of tennis fans. Carolyn Wozniacki is down there a lot also. So many of the men players when the Miami Open comes.
Boris Becker didn't make your list.
Boris Becker didn't. Believe me, this list I started with 20 names, and I believe the one at sunsentinel.com actually features 15 because I had such a hard time whittling it down. Clarence Clemens. Lived up in Boca Raton, the late Clarence Clemens from the E Street Band, Bruce Springsteen, sax player, played so many anthems at the arena.
Well, because Riley's a huge Springsteen fan, and which made him a huge Clemens fan, and he would come down. It was always fun when you walk in there and he's playing the national anthem.
Yeah, it was just a special time there. And then Gloria Estefan. And the Estefans, just their overall part of South Florida and what they were. The first event ever at American Airlines Arena when it opened was a Gloria Estefan concert. Her husband Emilio has been down there also. Again, we talk about fabric of South Florida. When you put your all-time fabric of South Florida entertainment people, as much as we spoke about Gabrielle Union coming in, the Estefans, they are the rhythm of South Florida, aren't they?
You know what? When they are fans. They show up a lot. It isn't like they're CNBC and celebrities. They come because it seems like they're basketball fans.
Yes, and you can tell even when the arena opened, it was more than just being at the arena. It was being Heat fans. It was sort of rooting for them, so we could see it from there. And I guess now we'll go to our last name here on the list.
Has to be.
It is. I mean, and again, when you look at someone like Jimmy Buffett and what he has done in South Florida and been a part of it, including getting ejected from a Heat game for yelling at a referee. Joe Forte was the referee actually at the time, and he said he didn't know who Jimmy Buffett was. Hasn't been there as much in recent years, but he's almost been sort of this signature guy at courtside. And Dave, the passion was real, wasn't it?
It was, and I remember Pat Riley turning to the official after Buffett got kicked out. Riley related this conversation. He said, "Do you know who you just kicked out?" And the guy goes, "No." And he goes, "You just kicked out Jimmy Buffett." And he goes, "Who?"
Yes. So Joe Forte at that time had no idea who he was, and then they finally got that straightened out. There's been some politicians ejected from the arena also. It's been a little different time. But Jimmy Buffett really, when the Heat were not so good and got good, this is not a front-running fan. This is someone who's sort of the essence not only of Key West, but all of South Florida. So it's been a fun ride. I'm really curious to see who shows up. Floyd Mayweather has been a constant at the arena, but I think obviously you'll see a bunch of them if they're in town. Marlins and Dolphins, maybe even some Panthers. But clearly, when you're the only playoff team in town, it's a lot easier to draw
people. Not
people.
only in town for a year and a half now.
Yes.
I mean, and the only regular playoff show this millennium, really.
Yes. So now we'll sort of get to summing up all the playoffs. We'll go beyond the Miami Heat. We'll look at the matchups. I was up late last night. The NBA released their schedule at 3 in the morning, and I know that because if you look at the timestamp on my story, you will see that. Tons of intriguing matchups. So we're going to take this matchup by matchup, go through them real quick, Dave. We're running a little low on time. Let's first start in the Western Conference. The number 8 versus number 1, Timberwolves against Rockets. Who do you like here, Dave?
I was not breaking this down at 3 in the morning, Ira, just for the record.
I stay up so you don't have to.
Look, let's say this 8 versus 1.
Yes.
Okay, it's not, and the 8 seed, yes, 8 seed last won 2012 because Derrick Rose tore up his knee.
Yes.
Okay, so it takes something like that for the Timberwolves.
And the Timberwolves do not defend, and the one team you cannot not defend against is the Houston Rockets. I think this could be over in a hurry. Just the fact that the Timberwolves needed the last game of the season and overtime to beat Denver to get into the playoffs with Jimmy Butler, with all the star talent in that team and Karl Anthony Towns, makes you wonder if they're suspect. Now we go to me. I think this is the most fascinating series of the playoffs. Dave, we're going to look right now at the number 7 Spurs against the number 2 Warriors. Could the Golden State Warriors go out, Dave, in the first round of the playoffs?
Well, Stephen Curry is not going to play.
Not in the first round.
And that's the issue here. And they're going against a professional franchise.
Without
and
Kawhi.
Great coach without Kawhi. I don't think the Warriors can get beat, but I'd be a little nervous if I was them.
Yeah, and Dave, I think this is going to be a series of attrition in a playoff of attrition. So I think the question more is this: how much will the Spurs take out of the Warriors when the Warriors have to go through the rest of the gauntlet there in the Western Conference? All of a sudden, I agree with the seedings. I think the Rockets are the favorite in the Western Conference and the favorite in the NBA. It's crazy, Dave, that in April I'm asking this question. Do the Golden State Warriors have to again prove themselves?
Sure, you do every year. But the question for the Warriors, if Curry's back and healthy is the question, they're going to win. Now, if he's not, and we saw a couple years ago, before they had their run, really,
right.
he couldn't get healthy during the playoffs.
Yes, and he had those injuries, and that was an issue. Next series we're going to look at, number 6 Pelicans against the number 3 Blazers. Dave, to me, this is about star power. We spoke for almost half an hour now about how the Heat don't have a true star. Pelican side, Anthony Davis, unbelievable season. If it wasn't for Harden and LeBron, probably MVP. On the other side, a guy we don't get to see a lot here because the games are too late for old guys like you and me, Damian Lillard and what he's done. When you look at this series, is it as simple as Davis versus Lillard?
Yes, absolutely, to me. And I'm going to go with Lillard, but I'm not going to argue if you're going to go with Davis. I'm going to go with Portland and Lillard.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Davis here because I think he is maybe the most unstoppable player in the Western Conference this side of James Harden. Let's finish the Western bracket with the number 5 Jazz against the number 4 Thunder. And to me, this is a referendum on who the Thunder are. Even Monday against the Heat, we saw a team that probably with their talent, with Carmelo and Westbrook and Paul George, should be better than they are. Dave, sum up the experiment of the Thunder Big Three. We've seen plenty of Big Threes down here. And is this the start of their march back up to relevance, or is this the start to them losing Paul George in the offseason?
I think it's losing Paul George. And Paul George hasn't played well this last half of the year
he has
for
not.
whatever reason. And Utah would, I think, is an awful matchup for the Thunder. Very disciplined, almost a plotting team.
Defensive.
With a big guy in the middle who should hammer Westbrook when he comes down the lane.
Yeah, I'm going to take the Thunder in this, but in a long series, maybe 7. I also think, Dave, this could be the Thunder's last round of the playoffs winning a series. Let's move to the East. And as you know, you're with me at American Airlines Arena on Wednesday night. And literally, by the minute, we could see those seedings moving up and down. It was like one of those maps you have. The Heat's in Boston. No, the Heat's not in Boston. The Heat are in Philly. No, the Heat are in Toronto. Get me Delta. Get me Marriott.
That only mattered to us because we're trying to
book our travel planning. So let's start with the East and let's look at the Wizards Raptors. Obviously, last night, the Raptors really wanted to get that 60th victory. It made no sense to me, the injuries they risked. When I'm looking at the court
I don't understand that
in
either.
overtime and seeing DeRozan and seeing Lowry, I'm like, what are they doing? But when I ask that one question of what are they doing, there's no team I ask about it more than the Wizards. How can the Washington Wizards, with John Wall and Bradley Beal and Otto Porter, be only a number 8 seed? How do you see this series coming out?
I think Beal and Wall need to be forced to spend a summer together in a cabin to try to get
no doors
along.
and no windows.
Nothing but maybe a video game. Yeah. Because they're the most disappointing team in the league, to me, that they cannot make it work. And here they are, an 8 seed. They got beat by Orlando.
Yes.
When they could have won and played Boston in the playoffs.
Much more favorable.
Terrible.
And instead, you look at how that played out, and Orlando pulled its starters. I didn't even know Orlando had starters.
Second half, they're playing their scrub. Orlando wanted to lose.
They're playing Heat Summer Leaguers and couldn't. So I think Raptors rather easily in that series. Now the finagling portion of our schedule. We get to the Bucks and the Celtics. Dave, you predicted it. Before, I was speaking to Dave Hyde during the day, and he goes to me, there is no way the Bucks are going to win this game because if they do, they could wind up playing the Cavaliers in the first round. And I'm going, Dave, they've got Antetokounmpo, they've got Pride and everything.
I didn't think they could throw it that
what was it,
wildly, though.
It was like 50-12 at the end of the first quarter when they were playing Philadelphia. It was ridiculous.
They made no pretense of what they were doing, did they? And in this series, look, Giannis will win a game, right? But the Celtics, to me, are just...
Still, even without Kyrie and Hayward and Keith and Marcus Smart.
Because Milwaukee is scatterbrained. You know, I don't know what they are yet. They never put it together. They should have been better than they are. Can they do it in the playoffs, I guess?
I'm curious about that, and people keep this in mind. Should the Heat win their first-round series, and should the Bucks upset the Celtics, believe it or not, the NBA does not, unlike the NFL or NHL used to, reseed. The Heat could be a home court team in the second round.
That's a good little fact.
If the Heat beat Philadelphia and the Bucks beat the Celtics, you have the home court Miami Heat in the second round. This could get intriguing, which brings us to the matchup of the hour, and we've held off till now. This is the 6-3 in the East. It's the Heat. It's against the 76ers.
To me, this is the best series.
Really?
Opening, yes.
Even without the potential star power of lacking Joel Embiid.
Because it's fascinating. the cultures of the two franchises, the Sixers tanked to get in, the Heat, even right up to the end, refused to tank at all. And you look at, look, there's no great matchup either. So this is the most interesting one to me.
All right, and now we have to get to this point, and I'm going to put you on the spot first so I can go on the spot after. And you do have to do this because I know our online editor, Kevin Lerner, will insist probably the next hour. Get me your prediction.
I'll go 76ers in 7, just because you look again at the star power, especially if Embiid comes back. But Simmons is a guy everybody in the league loves right now. You know who he reminds you of? Is a young Dwyane Wade, fearless going into the playoffs. And if he's fearless in the playoffs, the Heat are going to have a tough time handling them.
Dave, I'm going to agree with you. I'm going to go Philadelphia in 7. This is not an anti-Heat pick or anything like that. I just think when you look at the matchup right now, Philadelphia with home court, and I think, Dave, there's a swing factor in this. If Philadelphia gets in trouble, they can bust open Joel Embiid as needed. To me, the Heat's entire series comes down to this. Can Hassan Whiteside be a dominant player? If Hassan Whiteside does not have at least double-doubles of significant numbers early on, I just think the three-point shooting of the Sixers is reliable. It's J.J. Redick. It's Marco Bellinelli. It's Ersan Ilyasova. It's Dario Saric. With the Heat, it's Wayne Ellington, and then maybe somebody else. I'm not so sure that he'd get out of the first round. I'm going to agree with you here. I hope I'm wrong. I'd like to work into May if I could. Finally, the last Eastern Conference series, Cavaliers, obviously, they don't care where they're seated. This is the lowest playoff seed in just about a decade for LeBron. They lost their final regular season game, Cleveland, to the Knicks. They're playing the Pacers. I think the Pacers got the worst shake of any team on closing night. They were basically, give us anyone but the Cavaliers. How do you see this series, and how do you see LeBron shaping up?
Well, look, LeBron's never lost an opening series. I don't expect him to lose this one. At the same time, I have no idea what the Cavaliers are going to do, because has he been asked to carry, at this point in his career,
this young and this untalented, untested,
untested team. So I don't know what Cleveland's going to do. I'm picking them to go to the finals just because it's the East, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Pacers give them a tough battle and the wheels come off for Cleveland.
See, I think Cleveland makes it through the first round. LeBron James has never lost a first-round playoff series. I don't think this is time yet. Here's what happened to the Cavaliers, though, the way the whole seedings worked out. Toronto in the second round. And that's what they wanted to avoid. They wanted Philadelphia second round. They wanted Boston second round. That number 3 seed was meaningful for them. I think you're going to see the best playoff matchup in the Eastern Conference come in the second round when Toronto plays Cleveland. And that's why I like the Heat's part of the bracket. The Philadelphia, Miami, Milwaukee, Boston part of the bracket, there's going to be a team that doesn't deserve, I don't mean this unfairly, to get to the Eastern Conference, who's going to break through. That's what I think is going to make the remaining 2 weeks and maybe further so intriguing for us, Dave. So, Dave, I want you, before we close out the show, to give me this. Your ultimate upside for the prediction. Everything goes perfect, that he can do this. Your ultimate downside prediction for the Heat.
We talking the playoffs?
Well, in other words, how far can they go? How soon can it be over? How ugly could it be?
If everything goes perfectly for them, everybody plays to the maximum of their ability, they can go to the Eastern Conference Finals for the very reason you've been laying out there, which is Milwaukee can beat Boston, but even if they play Boston, if the Heat are coming off a win against Philadelphia, then sure, they could beat Boston. They wanted Boston in the opening series, so it's an easy road.
And what's
to
the downside? How wheels falling off could it happen?
This is a scary thing for the Heat, really, to me, is if they don't get by Philadelphia. Where are they in the East moving forward? You got Boston is without its 2 top players and 3 of its top 6, 5, 6 with Marcus. You're
right there.
And they're going to be the power in the East right now if they get healthy. And they're the roadblock. And if the Heat, as a 6th seed, cannot somehow improve their roster, and they got contractually, they're in trouble. So can Riley work some magic this offseason? But if you can't get out of the first round, you can't naturally improve your roster, then you're in trouble.
And then Dave and I agree with that. And to me, the point of this playoffs is this. When you look at the Heat situation right now, it's not just these playoffs. It's not just going as far as you can. You're trying to showcase what you have to a free agent. Hey, you be the one more piece. We'll make the money work. We've had a good series against Philly. We've gotten to the second round. We want to entice you. Or we want to showcase our players. We want to take our Hassan Whiteside, please. Maybe our James Johnson. You like Kelly Olynyk? Take Tyler Johnson's contract also. I think the Heat have to sell themselves in these playoffs. I think they have to look and go out and say, hey, we are attractive as a team to bring you in. We are attractive as a team that maybe you want some of our pieces to help alleviate our salary cap concerns. My concern is this. In Philadelphia, you might remember him, Dave, former national writer Chris Sheridan, Associated Press, and other places, is not only predicting a Philadelphia 76ers sweep, he's predicting they won't even need Joel Embiid in the series. If the Heat can't force Joel Embiid to get on the court and have to play, then I think for all the good of the end of the season, for getting the number 6 seed, I think all of a sudden you'll look and you'll say to yourself, you know what? In the NBA, where 16 of 30 teams make the playoffs, there has to be more than that.
Well, and that was the danger if they were going to play a Boston.
Right.
If they played Boston, everybody, well, they have a chance against Boston, a good chance. But Boston, again, was out their top players. And what does it say at the Heat? They only have a good chance. Look, the Heat are an interesting team, but it has limited upside right now.
And I agree. So we will know soon enough. Saturday, the Miami Heat open the playoffs, 8 o'clock in Philadelphia. First 2 games there, then 2 games at American Airlines Arena. We will get you Emma Kate Austin's predictions. If we went on the spot, we'll get her predictions for you also. And hopefully we'll be back at least one more time for these playoffs for another Ask Ira Live. For Dave Hyde, I'm Ira Winderman.